Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I could feel the weight of the room the second I stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and perfume, the creak of the old hardwood floors under my feet. Everything was exactly the same. But today, it felt different. Heavier, like I was walking into a courtroom, not a family gathering. My name is Olivia. I'm 33 years old, and I live in a modest apartment in the city. My life isn't extravagant by any means. I'm a researcher in biotechnology, working on things that could change the world. Or at least, I hope they could. But to my family, I'm still that daughter who doesn't quite fit in. Today, I was sitting at the center of a family intervention, surrounded by faces I knew all too well. My father, looking more serious than usual, sat across from me with his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. My mother, ever the peacemaker, kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, not saying a word yet, but her eyes spoke volumes. My older brother Jason sat beside her, his arms crossed, his brow furrowed. And then there was Amanda, my younger sister, looking around the room like this was just another family meeting. Olivia, my father began, his voice slow and measured, like he was reading a script he had practiced over and over again. We love you, but we can't keep watching you waste your potential. I glanced around the room, trying to keep my composure. My career in biotechnology wasn't something I had chosen on a whim. I had dedicated years to it, years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and intense focus. But none of that seemed to matter right now. All that seemed to matter to them was that I didn't have the right job, the right amount of money, or the right kind of life. You've been living in that tiny apartment for how long now? My father continued. And don't get me started on your career. Biotechnology is a nice dream, Olivia, but it's not practical. You need something that will provide for you, something stable. My heart sank, but I stayed silent. It wasn't the first time they had criticized my choices. Jason, always the pragmatic one, chimed in. What you need to consider, Liv, is something more traditional. Have you thought about real estate or maybe pharmaceutical sales? That's where the money is. Real estate, pharmaceutical sales, those were their ideas of success. The practical careers they had always envisioned for me. The careers that didn't require blood, sweat, and years of study in a lab. But that wasn't who I was. I was a researcher. I was in the thick of something important, something that could change the way we understood medicine. But none of that mattered to them. They didn't understand. They didn't want to. You don't even have a husband, Amanda piped up, her voice light but with that bite that always seemed to cut just a little deeper. And no kids. You're wasting your best years, Liv. You're focusing on… What? Research? That's not a life. It's an obsession. I felt my throat tighten at her words, but I remained silent, too tired to argue. It wasn't the first time they had said something like this to me. They didn't understand my dedication to my work. They didn't understand the passion I had for what I did. I'd gotten used to this. I'd gotten used to their judgment. Every family gathering felt like another interrogation of my life choices, as if my achievements weren't enough unless they fit into their narrow definition of success. Olivia, we're not saying you have to give up your dreams, my father said, his tone softening, but only just. But you need to be realistic. You're not getting any younger. And this, whatever it is you're doing, it's not going to bring you the stability or happiness you deserve. The silence that followed felt suffocating. My chest tightened, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. So I sat there, surrounded by my family, while they criticized everything I had worked so hard for. I couldn't bring myself to challenge them. I couldn't bring myself to explain. Not because I didn't want to, but because, after all these years, I knew it wouldn't matter. I had always been the black sheep, and it didn't look like that was going to change anytime soon. The conversation continued to swirl around me like a storm I couldn't escape. Their voices, each more self-assured than the last, blended into a hum that only seemed to get louder and louder. The words they used, real estate, pharmaceutical sales, stability, kept ringing in my ears, and I fought the urge to just shut it all out. Amanda, of course, was the first to jump back in. She always had a way of turning every conversation into an exhibition of her own success. Well, as you know, my real estate business is booming, she said, her tone dripping with that polished smugness she'd perfected over the years. I just closed on 2 properties last week. Things are really taking off. She didn't wait for a response, as if expecting me to fall at her feet in awe. My stomach turned. I tried to swallow down the frustration that built with every word she said, but it wasn't easy. And Jason, she added, turning toward my brother. He's climbing the corporate ladder so fast. I bet he'll be partner by next year. Jason, always the one to stay quiet in these situations, gave a small nod of acknowledgement, but didn't seem to care about the praise. That was Jason's thing. He let others boast for him while he focused on his work. The quiet achiever. I couldn't help but feel that knot in my stomach tighten, a knot I'd been carrying for so long now, every time they listed their accomplishments in front of me. None of them seemed to notice that I was working just as hard, if not harder, just in a different way. I glanced at my parents, hoping for some kind of support, but my mother, who always seemed to be trying to hold everything together, just looked at me with that tired expression she wore when she was trying to be diplomatic. And my father? Well, he was too busy pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, avoiding eye contact like he always did when the topic at hand made him uncomfortable. It's not about the money, Olivia, my father finally spoke, his voice low but firm. I just don't want to see you waste your time on something that's not going to get you anywhere. A career in research? It's a nice idea, but it's not practical. You need something that will give you a future. Real estate, sales, something with a paycheck that's guaranteed. My chest tightened as I sat there, listening to him. My father, the one who had always pushed for security and stability, who had built his own business with his bare hands, was telling me I wasn't practical enough. I had been living my dream for years now, putting in everything I had into something that could make a real difference in the world. And yet, none of them understood. None of them saw the value in it. You're so focused on this dream, my mother added, her voice softer now, but with an edge of concern. But what if it doesn't work out? You can't just keep chasing something that's intangible. What about your future? What about being financially secure? We just want you to be happy and safe. Happy and safe. The words cut through me. They were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. To them, success was measured by a salary, a house, a car. I had none of those things. What I had was my work. What I had was a hope that one day it would make a real impact. But they didn't see it that way. I could feel my heart beat faster, my frustration growing. The more they talked about their lives, their achievements, the more alienated I felt. Their definitions of success, their constant comparisons to their own careers and lifestyles, it was all too much. They were suffocating me. What they didn't understand was that this was my dream. The long hours, the sacrifices, the nights spent alone in my tiny apartment, every part of it was for something bigger than just me. Gene therapy, the research I was doing, it could change lives. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the image I presented. It was about making a difference. But I couldn't say that. Not now. Not like this. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I wasn't sure if I was angry, sad, or just tired of feeling misunderstood. I forced a smile. I know you all want what's best for me, I said, my voice tight, but I think you've all forgotten what it feels like to have a dream, to chase something that's bigger than yourself. But no one responded. The silence that followed felt heavier than ever, and the weight of my family's expectations pressed down harder than it ever had before. I sat in the tension-filled silence, the walls of my childhood home closing in around me. Their voices, so practiced, so sure of themselves, echoed in my mind, demanding I bend to their version of success. Every word felt like a punch, but none hit harder than when Uncle Robert spoke up. "Live, sweetheart," he said, his voice smooth as always. "I get it. You're passionate about what you do. But don't you think it's time to get serious about your future? Biotechnology isn't going to pay the bills, and it's not like you're getting any recognition for it. The real money comes from ventures that can be scaled, the kind that, well, actually get results." I bit the inside of my cheek, swallowing the sharp retort that wanted to leap out. He didn't understand. He never would. Uncle Robert had built his fortune in insurance, another practical career, and Aunt Margaret, who'd spent decades climbing her way up in real estate, nodded in agreement. "Robert's right," Aunt Margaret chimed in. "You're so focused on research and, what is it you call it? Gene therapy, but you have nothing to show for it. At least my work has tangible results. Houses, properties, people see the money, they see the value." I closed my eyes, trying to hold myself together. I wanted to scream, to throw every ounce of passion and pride in their faces, to make them understand how much I had sacrificed to get where I was. But I didn't. I sat still, biting my tongue, knowing full well that it wouldn't make a difference. You can't just keep chasing this dream of yours, Olivia, my father added, his voice low but firm. We've all been supportive, but this is getting out of hand. You're wasting time on something that's never going to pay off. I've always told you that you need to be realistic. His words stung in a way I couldn't quite describe. Realistic? Wasn't I the one putting everything on the line to change the future of healthcare? Wasn't I the one staying up late, designing the next big breakthrough in gene therapy, sacrificing time, money, and my own happiness for a cause bigger than myself? But none of that seemed to matter to them. They weren't asking about my passion. They weren't asking about the lives I hoped to change. They were asking if I was making enough money. If I was enough for them. Maybe you should just think about something that could make money. Jason spoke up, breaking the silence, his voice cold and distant. Something stable. Pharmaceutical sales, real estate. Something that won't take so long to see a return. We want to see you succeed, Liv, but you need to get real about it. Jason had always been practical to the point of being heartless sometimes. He worked in corporate law, made a name for himself with his slick suits and polished demeanor. To him, success was about what you could buy, how high you could climb in a corporate ladder. But it wasn't about the work, the people, or the difference you made. Look, Liv, Uncle Robert said, leaning forward with a strange smile on his face. We're not trying to be harsh, but the truth is, a career in biotech is a gamble. You could waste years, even decades, and have nothing to show for it. You could be working in a lab your whole life with nothing to show but a few research papers. A few research papers. The words burned as they left his mouth. My entire world, my entire purpose was reduced to a few pages of text. I had devoted my life to something that could change the world. To have it dismissed so easily made the blood rush to my head. But even then, I stayed silent. The words in my throat burned too much. I wanted to tell them how wrong they were, how important my work was, but I couldn't find the strength to argue anymore. Instead, my frustration turned inward. It wasn't just my career they didn't understand. It was me, the real me. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I wasn't the one who fit their mold. I wasn't the one who made them proud by their standards, and it hurt, more than I wanted to admit. My father glanced at me, his brow furrowed. You're a smart girl, Olivia. I just don't want to see you end up like one of those dreamers who never gets anywhere. I want you to be practical. I want you to have something real to show for all this work. My chest tightened as my mother reached out, her hand lightly touching mine. We just want what's best for you, she said softly, but there was a hint of sadness in her voice. We don't want you to struggle. Struggle. It was as if they saw me only through a lens of failure, as if all I had worked for, all I had dreamed of, was nothing more than a struggle to them. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to break down in front of them. I wasn't going to show them how much their words hurt. Instead, I took a shaky breath, holding myself together. I'm not going to give up on this, I said quietly. My voice shook, but I pushed forward, the words spilling out despite the knot in my throat. I believe in what I'm doing. I'm not going to stop because it's not the easy path, or because it doesn't fit into your idea of success. I've worked too hard to give up now. My father looked at me like he didn't understand, like he couldn't see the value in what I was doing. The others stayed silent, but the air in the room grew thicker with every second. You're going to regret this, Jason said, his voice flat, and that was it, the breaking point. I didn't know what else to say, so I didn't say anything. I sat there, heart heavy with the weight of their judgment, knowing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough. They didn't understand my passion. They didn't understand my drive. They never would. The tension in the room thickened, and I realized just how far apart I had drifted from the family I had always tried to please. The room grew thick with tension, the silence so heavy it felt like a living thing pressing down on us. My family's harsh words swirled in the air, but no one seemed to notice the weight they were carrying. It wasn't just the criticisms. They had shifted the very definition of success to something I couldn't even recognize anymore. As their voices continued to echo in my mind, something inside me began to stir, a quiet but fierce determination to stand up for myself. And then, just as my father opened his mouth to speak again, the shrill ring of my phone cut through the tension. I glanced at it, frowning. It wasn't like me to take calls during a conversation with my family, but something about this particular moment felt different. It was an email alert. I swiped to open it. The first few words were enough to make my heart stop. CNBC, breaking news. The words flickered on the screen, followed by a short sentence that made my throat tighten. Nexus Genomics goes public at a $5.1 billion valuation. Olivia Parker now worth $3.4 billion. I looked at my phone, almost not believing what I was seeing. My biotech startup, Nexus Genomics, the one that had spent years in the shadows in my modest apartment with a few loyal researchers and not a lot of recognition, was now worth billions. I had finally made it. The room fell completely silent as I glanced up, half expecting my family to notice the phone in my hand. But when I looked around, I saw them staring at me with a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and something that felt like fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. My father was the first to speak, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Is this for real?" he asked, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he took a step closer to me. You're a billionaire?" I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this conversation yet, but I knew I didn't have a choice. "Yes," I said quietly. "Nexus Genomics went public. It's real." My mother's face, which had been frozen in judgment moments before, softened slightly. How didn't we know about this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I had to fight the urge to laugh, but instead I simply looked at her. "You didn't know because I've been too busy working to tell you," I said, my tone calm but firm. "You've always dismissed what I do, so I kept it to myself." Amanda, who had been practically buzzing with smugness only minutes before, now sat frozen, her eyes wide. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. It was as if the weight of the moment had stolen her ability to speak. Jason just blinked, taking a step back in his chair, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. I didn't think it was that big," he stammered. "I thought you were just researching genes or something. I didn't realize it was $1 billion business." Uncle Robert, who had been the loudest critic of my career choice, stared at the phone in my hand, his face pale. That's incredible, Olivia," he said slowly. "I didn't know it was this big. I guess we all missed that, huh?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition in their eyes. They were finally seeing what I had been working toward all these years. I could feel their gaze on me, their judgment faltering as they processed the news. The years of criticism, the harsh words, all of it had led to this moment, and now they couldn't turn away. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked again, his voice tinged with regret. But I could tell he was still processing what this meant, what I had achieved. I paused for a long moment before responding. "I didn't tell you because you never believed in it. You didn't believe in me," I said softly, the anger I had kept buried for so long starting to rise to the surface. "All these years, I've been working in secret, because every time I brought it up, you dismissed it as something silly. You pushed me toward a real career, like pharmaceutical sales or real estate, because those were the practical options. But what I've been doing, is changing lives. And you couldn't see it. The silence that followed felt like the deepest one yet. They were speechless, their faces a mix of disbelief, awe, and discomfort. My father, still processing, simply nodded. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never understood." "Neither did I," Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. Jason just shook his head, his earlier smugness replaced with something closer to regret. "We were so focused on the practical things. We didn't realize how much you've done, how far you've come." Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret exchanged looks, both of them looking like they had just been hit with a reality check. But it was Aunt Margaret who finally spoke. "We were wrong, Olivia," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You've done something incredible, and we didn't see it." The words were like a weight lifting from my shoulders, but at the same time, I felt a wave of bitterness wash over me. All these years of silence, of hiding my work from them, had led to this. They had to be confronted with the reality they had been blind to for so long. I wasn't sure what would come next, whether they would accept my success or whether they would just fall back into their comfortable beliefs. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to justify myself anymore. I had proven them all wrong. The room felt smaller than it had a few minutes ago, like the walls were closing in as I stood there, still holding my phone in my hand. The weight of the news I had just dropped on them seemed to be settling in. But there was something else, a strange sense of liberation that kept me from feeling overwhelmed by the gravity of their silence. The look on their faces was one I'd never seen before. My father, who had always been the pillar of practical advice, stood with his mouth slightly agape. Amanda, who'd been so quick to boast about her own successes, was sitting frozen, her fingers nervously tapping on the table. Jason, usually so composed, stared at me as though he were seeing me for the first time. I looked at them, taking in their confused, shocked expressions. I could almost feel their collective realization that they had completely misjudged me and everything I had been doing. For a long moment, no one spoke. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning in the background, the quiet murmur of cars passing by outside, and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? His voice trembled slightly, something I wasn't used to hearing from him. I glanced down at the phone in my hand, where the CNBC article was still open. I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much to get to this point. And now, after years of their criticism, their lack of belief in my dreams, I had to ask myself, why hadn't I told them? I took a deep breath before answering. I didn't tell you because every time I did, you dismissed it. You said it wasn't practical. You told me to get a real job, and I listened at first. But the truth is, I couldn't keep hiding this. I couldn't keep putting my life on hold just to fit into what you thought I should be. My voice shook, but I pressed on. The truth is, I've been building this company from my small apartment. I've been working with a small team, paying for everything out of my own pocket. Every choice I made, my tiny apartment, my 10-year-old car, my clothes from thrift stores, was so I could put every dollar into research and development. I didn't buy new things because I knew that I had to invest in what mattered. My mother shifted in her seat, her hands now trembling. She couldn't meet my eyes. But Olivia, why didn't you share this with us? Why didn't you? Her voice faltered, and she stopped mid-sentence. I didn't share it because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, I said, cutting her off. Because every time I talked about it, you told me it wasn't real, that I needed to be practical. But I've been doing this quietly because I knew that if I waited long enough, I could prove myself. I didn't need your approval, I just needed to make it work. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So, all this time, you were building this billion-dollar company, and we had no idea? I nodded, the weight of the words finally sinking in. Yes, while you were all doing your thing, I was in my apartment, day in and day out, working toward this, and I did it without expecting anything from anyone. Uncle Robert, who had been sitting silently through all of this, cleared his throat. Liv, he said quietly, this is incredible. I don't think anyone had any idea. His eyes softened a little, but there was still disbelief in his voice. You've done something amazing, and we all missed it. My father, still reeling from the news, looked down at his hands. I never saw it. I never saw the sacrifice you were making. All I ever saw was the uncertainty, and I pushed you to be practical. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. I know you were just trying to protect me. I know you thought you were helping me, but I needed something more than safety. I needed to follow my passion. I needed to believe in something bigger than just paying bills. There was a long pause, and for the first time in my life, I saw my family processing something I had done, something that wasn't just practical or safe, but something that was, in its own way, revolutionary. Olivia, I'm sorry, my father finally said, his voice low but sincere. I didn't understand. I should have listened. We should have listened. My mother's eyes were moist now, and she nodded. I didn't realize how hard you were working. I thought you were struggling, and I was worried, but you weren't. You were just doing it on your own. I felt a pang in my chest as their apologies sank in. It wasn't enough to erase the years of misunderstanding, the years of being told that my dreams weren't worth pursuing, but it was a start. I don't expect you to understand everything, I said, my voice more steady now. But I need you to at least try. I need you to see that what I've done, what I'm doing, it's not just for me. It's for everyone. It's for people who need this research, for the future. Amanda, who had been silent until now, shifted in her seat. I never realized how much you've put into this, she said quietly, her usual smugness gone. I've always been so focused on my own stuff. I never really thought about what you were doing. I guess I just thought it was all a pipe dream. I didn't know how to respond. After all the years of her belittling my work, I didn't feel the need to seek validation anymore. I had found my own worth, and now, for the first time, they were seeing it too. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the silence of realization. My family, the same people who had told me time and time again that I wasn't enough, were finally seeing the truth. And that truth was, against all odds, I had succeeded. They didn't fully understand yet, but they were starting to, and for the first time, I felt like I was finally seen. The air in the room was still thick with the realization of what had just unfolded. The magnitude of the moment settled in with a weight I hadn't expected, one that shifted not only how my family viewed me, but how I had viewed them. The silence, now more than just awkward, was heavy with regret and something I couldn't quite place. My father, who had spent most of the conversation barely concealing his disappointment, was the first to speak. His voice, though slow, held an edge of something close to regret. Olivia, He paused, taking a deep breath, as though the words weren't coming easily. I'm sorry. I should have supported you, not pushed you to do what I thought was practical. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before. I should have listened. I was too focused on what I thought was best for you, and I didn't see what you were really doing. My heart twisted in my chest as I looked at him, his usually firm demeanor now softer, more uncertain. This wasn't the man who had told me to get a real job, or the one who'd questioned my choices for years. This was something different. Uncle Robert, who had been such a vocal critic, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, quieter. I can't say I fully understood what you were doing, Olivia, but I can see now how much effort and sacrifice you put into it. I was wrong to dismiss it, and I'm sorry for making you feel like you were wasting your time. Aunt Margaret, who had so easily brushed off my work as impractical, now nodded solemnly. You've done something incredible, Olivia, she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I didn't see it, but I see it now. I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner. The apologies came slowly, each one heavier than the last, but each one felt like a small weight lifting off my shoulders. I had spent years doubting myself, questioning if I was making the right choice. And now, as they spoke, I realized how much of my own self-doubt had been rooted in their dismissive attitude toward my dreams. But I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive them just yet. It wasn't just about the apologies. It was about the years of silence, the years of my work being discounted, my passion being ignored. They had only seen me as the daughter who couldn't hold a real job, the one who wasn't on the same path as the rest of them. I looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes. I appreciate the apologies, I said, my voice shaking slightly. But it's not enough just to say you're sorry. I need you to understand everything I've done for a reason. It wasn't about being difficult or stubborn. It was about following a dream that none of you believed in. And that hurt, more than you know. My father, who had always been the one to push me toward safety, looked down, his face clouded with guilt. I never meant to hurt you, Liv. I just thought you needed something secure. You were always so independent, and I was afraid you were setting yourself up for failure. I exhaled slowly. I wasn't setting myself up for failure. I was setting myself up for something that mattered, something that would change lives. But I kept quiet about it, because every time I spoke up, it felt like you didn't hear me. You just heard what you wanted to hear. The silence that followed was different than the ones before. This wasn't the stifling silence of frustration. It was the silence of acknowledgement. My family had heard me, and in a way, that was the first step toward healing. I took a deep breath, looking at my family with a sense of resolve. I can't change the past. I can't undo the years of judgment, the dismissals, the frustration. But I need you to understand that what I've achieved, is real. And I don't need you to agree with every choice I make. But I do need you to respect it. I need you to respect me. The tension in the room softened just a bit, but I could tell the road ahead wouldn't be an easy one. The damage had been done, but maybe, just maybe, we could start over. I'm proud of what I've done, I said, my voice steady, and I don't need anyone's approval anymore. But I need to know that moving forward, you'll see me for who I am, not who you want me to be. My father nodded slowly, as though considering my words carefully. I see that now, Olivia. I do, and I'm proud of you too. I just didn't know how to show it. I'll need time to process all this, my mother said quietly. But you're right, we haven't supported you the way you deserved. I'm sorry for that. I nodded, the knot in my chest loosening slightly. They were trying, even if it didn't feel like enough. And maybe, just maybe, we could build something new from here, something stronger. The conversation turned quieter after that, but there was a shift in the air. My family wasn't perfect, and we had a long way to go. But in that moment, I felt like I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't the daughter they tried to mold into something else. I was me, just Olivia, and I was ready to step into my future with a new understanding of who I was and who they could be. It was a start. It had been a few weeks since the momentous reveal, the day my family found out about Nexus Genomics, about my success, about the life I had built in secret. Since then, the dynamic between us had shifted in ways I never imagined. The weight of years of misunderstandings was lifting, slowly but surely. I had been invited to more family gatherings, though these were different. They weren't about me defending my choices anymore or listening to advice that I didn't want. This time, my family wasn't trying to push me into a mold I didn't fit. They were starting to understand, or at least trying to. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table one Saturday, sipping tea with my mother, when she turned to me with a tentative smile. "So," she began, almost hesitantly, how's your dating life these days?" I paused, surprised by the question. My mother, who had barely mentioned anything about my relationships over the years, was asking about my dating life. It had taken me years to realize that she wasn't asking out of obligation. This wasn't about the pressures she'd once placed on me to find a good match. It was different now. Her eyes were softer, her tone gentler. I set my tea down, smiling a little. "Actually, there's someone. His name's Mark. He's a researcher too. He's passionate about gene therapy, just like me. We met through a conference last year, and we've been seeing each other since." My mother's face lit up, a subtle but genuine smile forming as she leaned back in her chair. "That sounds nice," she said, her voice warm. "It's good to know you're happy, and it sounds like he understands your work. That's important." I nodded. "It is. It's nice to be with someone who gets what I do, someone who's as dedicated to their research as I am. He's been incredibly supportive." I could see the genuine interest in her eyes, a quiet understanding dawning on her. She wasn't trying to rush me toward marriage or children anymore. She was simply trying to understand my life, just as I was. The conversation shifted to my work, and I could see how my mother's perspective had begun to change. She asked more thoughtful questions now, asking how Nexus Genomics was doing, what the next steps were, and if there was anything she could do to help. It wasn't just small talk or polite interest, it was real curiosity. She was invested in my success, not because of some obligation to her daughter, but because she had finally come to see the value in what I was doing. A few days later, my father asked if he could join me for a tour of the lab. He hadn't really grasped what I did for a living before, but now he wanted to see it firsthand, and I was happy to show him. It felt like a new chapter in our relationship, one where he no longer saw me as the dreamer who couldn't get her life together, but as a person who had built something tangible, something that mattered. When we arrived at the lab, I could see the awe in his eyes as we walked through the halls. The machines, the scientists working in collaboration, the cutting-edge technology, I saw it all through his eyes. And for the first time, he seemed to understand. "I had no idea it was like this," he admitted, his voice quiet with reverence. "I guess I didn't understand what you were doing. I thought it was all just an idea. But this is real." "It's always been real," I said, smiling as I led him through the space. "But it takes time. It takes years of work, of building, of sacrifices. It's not overnight, but it's worth it." His eyes softened as he looked at me. "I'm proud of you, Olivia. I really am. I don't think I ever told you that enough." The words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his pride in a way I'd never felt before. It was a long, quiet moment before I spoke again, my voice quieter than usual. "I know you're proud of me now," I said, "but I need you to understand. This success, this life I've built, it's not for anyone else but me. It's always been about what I wanted, what I believed in. I'm glad you see that now." He nodded, his gaze focused on mine. "I do. I didn't see it before, but I see it now. And I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." We stood there for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken words hanging in the air. But this time, the silence was different. It was filled with understanding, with a quiet sense of peace. Later that week, my family, all of them came together to celebrate. My parents, Jason, Amanda, everyone was there. It wasn't a grand celebration. It didn't have to be. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement of what had changed, of how we had all shifted, even if just a little. We talked about my future, the next phase of Nexus Genomics, and the potential breakthroughs we were working on. My family, for the first time, listened without judgment, without pushing me into their version of success. They were beginning to understand, and that made all the difference. I was no longer the misunderstood daughter, the dreamer who couldn't get it right. I was Olivia, the successful woman who had made her own path, and my family, finally, was starting to see me for who I truly was. As I left the gathering that night, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about my success anymore. It was about the understanding, the acceptance, the knowledge that I no longer had to hide who I was, what I had accomplished, or who I was becoming. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe easy. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just stepping into a future of success, I was stepping into a future of peace. A few months had passed since the family gathering where everything shifted. The family, once divided by expectations, now seemed more connected. Their support, tentative at first, had grown into something more genuine. And in turn, I felt a sense of peace that had long eluded me. The changes in my family were subtle but powerful. My father, who once saw security as the only form of success, had started attending events related to nexus genomics. At first, he was hesitant, but now he actually seemed interested in the work we were doing. He didn't just sit in the back, uncomfortable and aloof. He asked questions, engaged with my team, and expressed pride in what I had built. Amanda, who had once looked down on my career choice, had started to show more interest in the science behind it. The questions she asked weren't driven by skepticism or dismissal anymore. They were driven by curiosity. She had even offered to host a fundraising event at one of her properties, something I never would have imagined a year ago. Jason, ever the quiet one, had started attending my talks and even gave a small speech at one of the corporate events we held. He had been the most difficult to reach, the most resistant to seeing the value in my work. But now, I could see a shift in how he regarded what I had achieved. It wasn't just about success or failure anymore. It was about meaning and impact. I had become more confident in my role at Nexus Genomics as well. I no longer felt the need to hide parts of my life. When I spoke to investors, I spoke with conviction, not just about the company's future, but about the lives it could change. Every new breakthrough felt like a personal victory, and every acknowledgement from my family, even if subtle, made that victory sweeter. The shift in our dynamic wasn't just about understanding the value of my work. It was about them starting to see the depth of my dedication. And as I looked at the changes in them, I began to understand them better too. One evening, over dinner, I brought up the idea of expanding our lab. It had always been a dream of mine, but I'd kept it in the background, not wanting to rush things. But now, with the company's success, it felt like the right time. I've been thinking about building a new lab, I said, setting my fork down and looking around the table. A bigger space where we can push our research further. A place where we can truly make a difference, not just in biotech, but in healthcare overall. My father, who had once been so focused on stability, nodded. That sounds like a good idea, he said, his voice thoughtful. I can see how much this means to you, Liv. If this is what you need to take the next step, then I support it. My heart lifted at his words. It wasn't just the financial support or the approval, it was his acknowledgement of what I was doing, of the vision I had for the future. Even Amanda was on board. You've come a long way, she said, smiling. I can't believe I didn't see it before. I've been so focused on my own work, but you've really created something special. If you need anything from me, whether it's connections or advice, I'm here. Jason, ever the practical one, raised an eyebrow. You know, it's going to take a lot of planning, a lot of resources. I know, I replied, but it's worth it. This is where we can really make an impact. The conversation that night was different. It wasn't filled with judgments or unspoken doubts. It was filled with excitement, curiosity, and the kind of support I had always wanted, but never thought I would get. As the evening wound down, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't just moving forward in my career, I was moving forward in my relationships with my family. They were beginning to see the value of my work, not just through the lens of financial success, but through the lens of what it could offer the world. And I knew for the first time that they were on my side, not just because of what I had achieved, but because they finally understood why I had done it in the first place. As I sat in my office later that night, reflecting on everything, I realized how far I had come, not just in my career, but in my own understanding of myself. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't playing by anyone's rules but my own. I had finally found peace, both with my work and with my family. The next chapter was just beginning, and I felt ready for it. Ready to build, not just my career, but the kind of relationships that would support me, not because I needed approval, but because I had earned it. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to look ahead. I wasn't afraid to keep moving forward, no matter what anyone else thought. The days leading up to the public presentation of Nexus Genomics' next phase were a whirlwind. The excitement was palpable, but there was also a sense of calm that came with knowing I had nothing to hide anymore. My family, once critical of my career, now stood behind me, not just out of obligation, but out of genuine support. It was a relief I hadn't fully anticipated, but one that felt like a long time coming. The night before the presentation, I sat with Mark, my partner, in the small office I'd made into my space at Nexus Genomics. It was late, but we'd been talking about the future, what the next steps for the company would be, what our personal plans were, and how we could build something even bigger together. He looked at me with a smile that spoke volumes. "You know, we've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the desk. "From working in a tiny apartment to running a $1 billion company, and tomorrow's just another step forward." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The journey had been long, and it had been tough. But here we were, not just as colleagues, but as partners, both in work and in life. "I'm so grateful," I said quietly, the words coming out more sincere than I even intended. "Grateful for you, grateful for what we've built, and honestly, I'm grateful for my family too." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Your family? I thought you didn't want to go back to them, after everything they put you through." I took a deep breath. It was true. There had been a time when I'd wanted nothing more than to break away completely from the people who had never understood my vision. But now, things were different. They were different. "They've changed," I said softly, thinking back to the last few weeks. "I don't expect them to understand everything, but they're trying. They're really trying, and that means something." Mark smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. "It's good, Liv. You've earned it." I squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of his words as they settled in my chest. I had earned it. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just stepping into my future alone. I was stepping into it with the people who mattered, the people who saw me for who I was and who I had become. The next day, as the presentation started, I looked out over the crowd, seeing familiar faces from the business world, as well as my family sitting in the front row. My mother, father, Amanda, and Jason, each of them had made an effort to be here, to show that they understood, even if they didn't fully comprehend the scope of what I had done. I began my presentation with the confidence I hadn't realized I had gained. I talked about the next steps for Nexus Genomics, the breakthroughs we were pushing for, the lives we were about to change. But more than that, I talked about why we were doing it, why this mattered. And as I spoke, I noticed my family, my parents and siblings, listening attentively, nodding along. Their faces weren't full of skepticism or judgment anymore. They were genuinely interested. They saw for the first time how far I had come and what my work could mean to the world. The moment was bittersweet, as I realized just how far we had all come, from the initial judgment to this newfound respect. It wasn't just about the financial success anymore. It was about the work, the impact, and the understanding that had finally settled between us. After the presentation, my family came up to me, each of them expressing pride in a way that felt authentic and genuine. My father, for the first time, didn't just give me a quick hug. He pulled me in tightly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Liv. I should have said that sooner," he whispered, his hands on my shoulders, looking at me with eyes that finally saw me for who I was. Not just the daughter he wanted to fix, but the woman I had become. Amanda was next. Her usual polished exterior was replaced with something softer, more vulnerable. "You were right all along, Liv. I didn't get it before, but I do now. You've built something incredible." Even Jason, who had always been distant in his support, nodded. "I'm impressed, Liv. I can't say I understood it, but I see it now. You've made it, and I'm proud of you." The words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. It wasn't just about the financial success, but the shift in how they saw me, not as a dreamer who was wasting time, but as a real force in the world. They were beginning to see the difference I was making. As the night wore on, I stood with Mark, watching my family interact with my colleagues, engaging in conversations about the future of biotechnology and the research we were doing. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking a path alone. "You did it, Liv," Mark said, squeezing my hand as we stood in the corner of the room, watching the festivities unfold. "I did," I replied, looking around at the people who had been part of my journey, some of them for years, and others who were just beginning to understand what I was all about. And I'm not done yet. As I stood there, Feeling the weight of the moment and the excitement of what was to come, I knew that this wasn't just about Nexus genomics anymore. It was about my future, one where I could finally be myself without fear of judgment, without fear of hiding my success. I was ready for what came next. No more hiding, no more second guessing, just forward.